King Charles just handed his sister power that no one outside the inner circle of the British monarchy fully anticipated, and the silence from the palace press operation makes the decision even louder than any official announcement ever could. This is not a story about ribbons and tiaras. This is a calculated constitutional maneuver, built on decades of quiet preparation, executed at precisely the right moment, and it has redrawn the invisible map of authority inside the House of Windsor in ways that historians will be writing about for generations. To understand why this matters so profoundly, you need to understand what the red box actually represents. That scarlet leather dispatch box is not a prop or a symbol in the decorative sense. It is the living nerve center of British governance. Inside it travel classified intelligence briefings, unsigned pieces of legislation, state documents requiring royal authorization, and correspondence from the highest levels of government. Traditionally, the red box goes to one person, and one person only, the reigning monarch. The identity of whoever holds access to that box is, in the language of the British constitutional system, the single most reliable indicator of where real authority actually sits. And right now, that box is in Princess Anne's hands. King Charles is fighting his own health challenges. That is a matter of public record, and to his considerable credit, he has been more transparent about it than almost any British monarch in modern history. Previous generations of royals would have maintained the fiction of invulnerability at all costs, hiding illness behind a wall of official silence. Charles has chosen a different approach, one rooted in honesty, and in doing so, he has created a governance challenge that demanded a structural solution rather than a cosmetic one. You cannot manage classified state documents and sign pieces of legislation into law while simultaneously managing a serious medical situation. Something had to give. The natural assumption would be that Prince William, as heir to the throne and the future King of England, would step naturally into an expanded administrative role. The logic is obvious on paper, but the reality of William's life right now makes that assumption collapse almost immediately upon examination. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has been navigating her own profound health journey, and William has made it unambiguously clear that his primary obligation in this season is to his wife and to their 3 young children. That is not a failure of duty. That is precisely the kind of human prioritization that the monarchy needed to learn how to accommodate. Forcing William to absorb the full weight of administrative governance, while simultaneously being the father and husband his family needs, would not serve him, and it would not serve the institution. Charles understood this, so he looked at his sister. And the more you understand about Anne's actual biography, not the headline version, but the genuine depth of her preparation for exactly this kind of role, the more inevitable that decision looks. Princess Anne was born in 1950, just 2 years after Charles. That shared generational experience is not incidental. She lived through the same defining moments of the 20th century, sat in the same rooms during the same negotiations, watched the same prime ministers come and go, absorbed the same institutional lessons her brother absorbed. She doesn't need a briefing document to explain why certain constitutional precedents matter. She was there when they were established. That depth of lived institutional knowledge is something you simply cannot manufacture quickly, and in a moment of genuine political sensitivity, it is invaluable. But beyond experience, and possesses something arguably even more politically useful in a royal context, she has absolutely no dynastic ambition. Under the old system of male preference primogeniture that governed royal succession during and Charles's childhood, and was born second, and then progressively displaced further and further down the line of succession as younger brothers arrived. By the time Andrew and Edward were born, she had effectively been removed from any realistic path to the throne. What might read as a historical injustice has, somewhat paradoxically, become one of her greatest political assets. when and opens the red box when she delivers the monarch's message to the Prime Minister, when she exercises the constitutional authority Charles has delegated to her. Nobody in government or in the press suspects she is doing it to consolidate personal power. There is no faction around her. There is no scheming network attempting to use her proximity to the throne for its own ends. She is exactly what she appears to be, a trusted deputy executing the will of a king she loves and respects. The groundwork for this moment was not laid overnight. Queen Elizabeth II spent decades, quietly and deliberately, preparing and for precisely this kind of role. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, whenever the Commonwealth faced a genuine crisis or a diplomatically delicate situation, it was and that Elizabeth sent in, not for the ceremonial tours, not for the ribbon-cutting visits that went to other members of the family, and was dispatched to the places where the situation was tense, where genuine negotiation was required, where the wrong word or the wrong gesture could make things significantly worse. Elizabeth trusted her daughter with real autonomy and real decision-making authority in those moments, which amounted to a multi-decade education in statecraft at the highest possible level. Then, near the end of her reign, Elizabeth made a move that locked everything into constitutional place. In late 2022, as her health was failing and she was thinking clearly about how Charles's kingship would need to function, Elizabeth orchestrated an amendment to the Regency Acts through Parliament, permanently adding both and Prince Edward to the list of Counsellors of State. The old list had become, in practical terms, unusable. Harry had removed himself from royal life and relocated to California. Andrew had been politically destroyed by his own scandals and was no longer a credible figure to exercise royal authority under any circumstances. The pool of people legally authorized to step in and exercise the monarch's powers had effectively shrunk to almost no one Charles would actually want in that position. Elizabeth fixed it, cleanly, legally, and in a way that could not be the formal titles and honors, and has accumulated over the years, tell the same story in a different vocabulary. In 1987, Elizabeth bestowed on her the title of Princess Royal, an ancient designation held by only one person at a time, traditionally the eldest daughter of the reigning monarch, and carrying with it an implicit lifetime commitment to crown service above all other considerations. In 1996, she was invested as a Knight of the Thistle, Scotland's highest order of chivalry, not as an honorary gesture, but in recognition of years of serious, substantive engagement with Scottish communities and Commonwealth affairs. And at Charles's coronation in 2023, he chose and to serve as his gold stick in waiting, riding in full military uniform on horseback directly behind the gold state coach through the streets of London. That is not pageantry. That is a public declaration, made in front of the entire nation, that this woman has his back. Her husband, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Laurence, has quietly risen alongside her. Timothy entered the royal household in the 1980s as a young naval officer appointed as an equerry to Queen Elizabeth. He was never a man who sought attention or position. He simply worked, reliably and without ego, inside the machinery that kept the family functioning. Elizabeth noticed. In 2011, she made him a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, essentially the Crown's personal expression of gratitude to someone who has served it faithfully and with real integrity. Charles went further, recently elevating Timothy to Knight Grand Cross, the highest rank within that entire system. That elevation is Charles's personal gift, entirely separate from any governmental process, and it is a direct statement about how central Timothy has become to the actual operational health of the monarchy, and does more than 450 official engagements per year. That figure is not simply impressive. It is almost without parallel among working royals, and it is sustained not by ambition for recognition, but by a genuine sense of obligation to the institution she has served her entire adult life. She doesn't court the press. She doesn't manage a personal brand. She shows up, she does the work, and she goes home. The British public has watched this for decades, and the trust they have placed in her reflects exactly what they see. What the public witnessed in the BBC documentary about Charles's coronation year only deepened that trust, and spoke about her mother's final days at Balmoral with a candor that most royals would never allow themselves in front of a camera. She described Elizabeth's anxiety about dying in Scotland, worrying about the logistical burden it would place on the government and the family, and she revealed that she had simply told her mother to stop thinking about everyone else for once and spend her final days exactly where she wanted to be. And talked about watching the imperial state crown lifted from Elizabeth's coffin during the funeral and the profound relief she felt. Not because she didn't love her mother, but because she understood that her mother had finally been released from a burden she had carried for 70 years. That moment of raw, honest emotion did something that no amount of official ceremony could have accomplished. It showed the country who Anne actually is. Queen Consort Camilla's exclusion from the mechanics of this arrangement is not accidental, and it is not subtle. She occupies the title. She appears at the state occasions. She sits beside Charles at the formal events that define royal public life. But the red box does not reach her. The classified briefings do not pass through her hands. The legislative documents do not carry her signature. In the language of the British constitutional system, that tells you precisely what Charles thinks about where real authority should sit during this period, and it aligns entirely with what the nation's own instincts have been telling it for years. What the monarchy is demonstrating right now, through this decision and through Charles and Catherine's broader willingness to speak honestly about illness and recovery, is an institution that has finally stopped pretending to be something it is not. The old strategy of maintaining the illusion of royal invulnerability served the institution for generations. But that strategy belongs to a different era. The monarchy that survives the 21st century will be one that trusts the public with the truth about health, about limitation, about the very human processes of sharing burdens and making hard choices. In that context, placing Princess Anne at the center of governance during one of the most fragile periods in the modern monarchy's history is not a crisis response. It is the monarchy being honest about what it needs and wise enough to reach for exactly the right person, and has spent her entire life preparing for this without ever asking for it. That is precisely why she deserved it.